never thought I'd develop these kinds of feelings for my own son. Here I am, 42 years old, standing in my bathroom and staring at my reflection like some lovesick teenager. My hands are trembling as I run them through my dark auburn hair, trying to make sense of it all, of that night together. Get it together, Sarah, I whisper to myself, but my eyes keep drifting to the curves that motherhood blessed me with. My rack is fuller now, straining against my silk robe, and my hips have this maternal width that men still notice. I work out regularly, keeping everything tight and toned, but I can't exercise away these forbidden thoughts. Let me share the story of that evening with my son. The house always felt emptier when my husband Mark was away on his endless business trips. At first, it was just a few days here and there, then weeks, now months. Jake was only 16 when the long absences started, and naturally, we grew closer filling that void. That smells amazing, Mom," became our nightly routine as I'd cook dinner. Just us two at that big table, Jake telling me about swim practice while I pretended not to notice how his shoulders had broadened, how his voice had deepened. Sometimes he'd help with dishes, his body accidentally brushing against mine in our cramped kitchen. Each touch sent electricity through my skin. I knew it was wrong. Life with Mark had become like living with a ghost, just traces of his presence left in our home. His suits hanging in the closet collected dust. His side of the bed stayed perfectly made. The excuse was always the same. Big project in Singapore, babe. Maybe another 3 months. I'd stopped counting the missed anniversaries and family dinners. Jake saw through it before I did. "Mom, when was the last time Dad even called?" he asked one morning over breakfast. I stirred my coffee, avoiding his eyes. 2 weeks had passed without a word. The silence in the house seemed to mock me. Then came that devastating lunch with my friend Karen. She fidgeted with her napkin, not meeting my gaze. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." Her words came out reluctantly, like pulling teeth. "Tom saw Mark last weekend in Bangkok. He wasn't alone." My hands trembled as Karen showed me the photos on her phone. There was my husband, the father of my son, outside some upscale restaurant. His arm was wrapped around a young woman. Couldn't have been more than 25. Another showed them kissing by a hotel entrance. The date stamp revealed he'd been there for months, not traveling between cities like he claimed. I threw up in the restaurant bathroom. 16 years of marriage, and he couldn't even be honest about his affair. The pieces started falling into place. The late-night calls he'd take outside, the new cologne I'd smell on his rare visits home, the mysterious charges at jewelry stores. Coming home that day, I found Jake in the kitchen. One look at my face, and he knew. "Mom?" he asked softly. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing as I told him everything. He held me tight, his jaw clenched with anger at his father's betrayal. "We don't need him," Jake whispered fiercely. "I'll take care of you." That night, I took off my wedding ring and placed it in a drawer. Jake ordered pizza, and we sat on the kitchen floor eating straight from the box like we used to when he was little. But now he was the one comforting me, his strong arms making me feel safe as my world crumbled. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. Mark didn't even come home to sign them, had his lawyer handle everything. Jake stood by my side through it all, becoming the man of the house in more ways than I could have imagined. Our bond grew stronger through the pain, filling the void his father left with something deeper, more intense. I remember how our relationship moved to the next level vividly. It was around 2 a.m., and I couldn't stop the tears. The house was so quiet you could hear every creak, every whispered sob I tried to muffle into my pillow. The divorce papers lay scattered across my bed, Mark's signature still fresh on the dotted line. He hadn't even bothered to write a note. The soft knock on my door startled me. "Mom?" Jake's voice was gentle, concerned. "I heard you crying." I quickly tried wiping my tears, but there was no hiding it when he switched on my bedside lamp. His face showed such worry, such mature understanding beyond his 19 years. "I'm sorry I woke you, honey," I managed to say, but my voice cracked. Jake didn't hesitate. He sat beside me on the bed, gathering the divorce papers and setting them aside. Then he just pulled me into his arms, letting me cry against his chest while he stroked my hair. "Remember when I was little," he said softly, "and you'd hold me during thunderstorms? You'd tell me everything would be okay until I believed it." His heart beat steady under my ear. "Let me do that for you now." We talked for hours that night. Really talked. About everything. His father's betrayal, our loneliness, how we'd been each other's lifeline these past few years. Jake admitted he'd known something was wrong long before I did. "Dad never deserved you," he said fiercely. "You gave him everything, and he just took you for granted." I found myself telling Jake things I'd never told anyone. How isolated I'd felt. How Mark's distance had eroded my confidence, made me feel old and unwanted. Jake's grip on me tightened. "You're beautiful, Mom," he whispered. "Any man would be lucky to have you." The way he looked at me then, something shifted in the air between us. His thumb wiped away a tear on my cheek, lingering longer than it should. I became acutely aware of how close we were, how safe I felt in his strong arms. Our eyes met in the dim lamplight, and I saw something there that both thrilled and terrified me. "Jake." I breathed his name, not sure if I was warning him or encouraging him. His hand cupped my face, and I felt myself leaning into his touch. The line between maternal comfort and something else blurred dangerously. We stayed like that, teetering on the edge of something forbidden, until the first rays of dawn began creeping through my window. Neither of us spoke about the tension, the electricity that had charged the air between us. But something had fundamentally changed that night. We both felt it. As Jake finally stood to leave, he bent down and kissed my forehead, his lips lingering just a fraction too long. "Get some sleep, Mom," he whispered. "I'll always be here for you." I watched him go, my heart racing with emotions I shouldn't name. That night marked the beginning of our transformation from mother and son to something far more complex, more dangerous. The morning after our late night talk, everything felt different. I came downstairs to find Jake making breakfast, something he'd never done before. The way he smiled at me, watched me sip my coffee. There was an intensity there that made my hands shake slightly. "Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped by," he said casually. "Asked if we wanted to join their barbecue this weekend." The way he said "we" felt loaded with meaning, like we were something more than mother and son now. My friend Lisa came over that afternoon for coffee. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Jake and me move around the kitchen together. We'd developed this unconscious dance, anticipating each other's movements, finding excuses to brush past one another. When Jake's hand grazed my lower back, reaching for a mug, Lisa nearly choked on her drink. "Sarah," she said after Jake went upstairs, "what's going on with you two?" I felt my face flush. "Nothing," I insisted too quickly. "We've just gotten closer since, Mark." Lisa didn't look convinced. "Honey, I saw how he looks at you, and how you look at him. It's different." She wasn't wrong. Throughout the day, I caught Jake watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. His eyes would linger on my legs when I crossed them, dart away guiltily when caught. I found myself doing the same, admiring his arms as he carried in groceries, watching his throat when he swallowed. Karen and Beth came over for wine that evening. Jake stayed in the living room with us instead of going to his room like usual. He sat close to me on the couch, our thighs touching. I could feel Beth's eyes on us, noting how I leaned into him slightly. "You two seem cozy," Karen commented carefully. The wine had loosened her tongue. "Very cozy." The judgment in her tone made Jake's jaw clench. His hand found mine protectively, fingers intertwining. The gesture wasn't lost on my friends. They left earlier than usual, whispering to each other on the way out. I knew they'd be talking about us, about the charged atmosphere they'd witnessed. Jake and I stood in the doorway watching them leave, his body angled towards mine possessively. "They suspect something," I whispered, anxiety creeping into my voice. Jake turned me to face him, his hands on my shoulders. "Let them," he said firmly. "They don't understand what we have." The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. We stood there, too close, the air heavy with unspoken desires. His thumb traced my collarbone and I shivered. "Jake," I whispered, half warning, half plea. He stepped back, but his eyes promised more. "Good night, Mom," he said softly. But the way he said Mom felt different now. Almost like a lover's endearment, rather than a son's address. I lay awake that night, listening to him pace in his room above mine. The floor creaked with his movements, each sound reminding me of his presence, his proximity. We were spinning toward something inevitable, and we both knew it. The question wasn't if anymore, but when. The floorboards groaned under his footsteps, each creak of the stairs making my heart race faster. I wasn't surprised when my bedroom door slowly opened, Jake's silhouette outlined in the hallway light. We'd both known he'd come. "Mom," his voice was rough, uncertain. "I can't stop thinking about last night, the way you felt in my arms, how right it seemed." He moved closer, moonlight catching the tension in his face. "I know I should feel guilty, but..." "Shh." I sat up in bed, reaching for him. "You don't need to explain. I feel it too." The mattress dipped as he sat beside me, his breathing heavy in the darkness. My hand found his cheek, thumb tracing his jawline. Time seemed to stop as we leaned toward each other. The first brush of his lips against mine was tentative, questioning. Then something broke loose inside us both. His mouth claimed mine properly, years of repressed feelings pouring into that single connection. My fingers tangled in his hair as his arms pulled me closer. The night continued into a night we both found incredible, but at the same time we knew was deeply wrong. The morning sunlight felt accusing as it streamed through my windows. I'd barely slept, replaying that night over and over. The house was silent, too silent, as I made my way downstairs. Jake sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched in front of him. His eyes met mine, and the electricity from last night crackled between us. "We need to talk about this," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. I nodded, taking the seat across from him. The physical distance felt necessary, safer. His hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white with tension. "What we did," I started, then faltered. "How do you discuss crossing such a forbidden line with your own son?" Jake reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine before pulling back. "I know it's wrong, Mom. Everything tells me it's wrong." His voice was strained. "But being with you feels more right than anything ever has. These feelings, they've been building for so long." I understood completely. The guilt warred with an overwhelming sense of rightness, of completion. "Society would never understand," I whispered, watching his face. "We'd have to be so careful, so secret." "I don't care what anyone thinks," Jake's voice grew fierce. "After what Dad did, after everything we've been through together, you're all that matters to me now." We sat in heavy silence, both understanding the weight of this decision. Moving forward meant living a lie, hiding our true relationship from everyone. But looking at him across that table, seeing the love and determination in his eyes, I knew we'd already crossed the point of no return. "We can never tell anyone," I said softly. "Not your friends, not mine. No one can ever know." Jake nodded, reaching for my hand again. This time, I didn't pull away. A year passed, and life took unexpected turns. Jake met Emma at college. Pretty, smart, studying marine biology. When he first told me, my stomach twisted with jealousy. I'd cry silently in my room, imagining them together. But Emma surprised me. She was genuine, kind, and made Jake happy in ways I couldn't publicly. "She's good for your cover," I admitted one evening, watching them study together from the kitchen. Jake squeezed my hand when Emma wasn't looking. "No one compares to you, Mom," he whispered. We learned to navigate our complicated dynamic. Then David entered my life, a divorced architect who moved in next door. He was different from Mark, attentive, present, honest. At first, Jake was coldly polite to him, until one night we had a heart-to-heart. "I want you to have someone public in your life," Jake said, his voice tight with emotion. "Someone who can take you to dinner, hold your hand at movies, things I can't do." His maturity touched me deeply. David and I married in a small ceremony. Jake stood as best man, giving a moving speech about second chances and happiness. Only he and I knew the deeper currents running beneath his words. That night, he hugged me and whispered, "I'm happy for you, Mom. Really." Our secret remained just that, secret. To the world, we were a normal blended family. David was a loving husband, Jake a devoted son. Emma became like a daughter to me. But in private moments, a lingering touch while doing dishes, meaningful glances across dinner tables, Jake and I maintained our unique bond. Living this double life became an intricate dance. David filled my days with genuine warmth, weekend trips to the coast, surprise flowers, thoughtful notes in my lunch. He was everything a husband should be, attentive and caring in ways Mark never was. I found myself truly falling for his gentle nature and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. Jake's relationship with Emma blossomed too. She'd come over for family dinners, her hand casually resting on Jake's thigh under the table. Sometimes I'd catch them kissing in the hallway, and my heart would twist with complicated emotions. Pride in seeing my son so happy, jealousy I had to suppress, guilt for feeling that jealousy at all. Emma asked me to move in with her, Jake told me one evening when David was at a conference. The pain in his eyes matched mine. We knew it was the natural next step for a young couple, but it meant our private moments would become even rarer. David and Emma's presence in our lives actually made things easier in some ways. They were our alibis, our covers, allowing Jake and me to maintain our deeper connection without suspicion. If I spent an afternoon helping Jake with laundry at his new apartment, Emma was always mentioned as being at class. If Jake came over late when David was away, we'd say he was checking on me as any good son would. The complexity of our emotions grew. I learned to genuinely care for Emma, to want her happiness with Jake. She'd seek my advice about their relationship, never knowing the irony of her future mother-in-law being her boyfriend's secret lover. Jake developed a real respect for David, appreciating how he cared for me while understanding our unspoken arrangement. During family gatherings, we'd all sit together, David's arm around my shoulders, Emma cuddled into Jake's side, looking like the perfect blended family. Nobody saw the secret glances between mother and son, the brush of hands while passing dishes, the deep understanding that flowed beneath the surface. "It's strange," Jake confided once. "I actually want them both to be happy. David's good to you, and I love Emma. But we'll always have us," I finished softly, understanding completely. Our love had evolved into something more complex than just passion. It was an unbreakable bond that could accommodate other loves while remaining uniquely ours. We learned to cherish our rare private moments while building genuine lives with our partners. It wasn't perfect, but it was our reality. A delicate balance of public affection and private devotion, of shared secrets and separate lives, of a mother and son who found a way to have everything while sacrificing nothing.